On the night that changed everything, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago walked into a room filled with billionaires, politicians, and crime families. Crystal chandeliers lit the grand ballroom, expensive music filled the air, and every guest wore a perfect smile that hid dangerous secrets. People expected Lorenzo Moretti to arrive alone, as he always did. But when the doors opened, every conversation stopped. A woman walked beside him. She wasn't a famous model. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't dressed to attract attention. She wore a simple dark green evening dress that fit her comfortably instead of trying to make her look smaller. Her soft brown hair rested on her shoulders, and she walked with quiet dignity. Even though she could already feel hundreds of eyes judging her, her name was Clara Bennett. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fashion magazines. She had kind eyes, a warm smile, and a plus-size figure she had spent most of her life trying to hide. The whispers started immediately. Is that really his date? She's too big for him. A mafia boss could have any woman in the world. Why would he choose her? Some guests laughed behind expensive glasses of champagne. Others smiled with fake sympathy. Clara heard every word. She lowered her eyes for only a second. Lorenzo noticed. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Because Lorenzo Moretti never fought with words. He waited. Then he destroyed people with actions. Before the night was over. Everyone in that ballroom would regret laughing. Just 1 year earlier, Clara's life had been completely different. She worked at a small neighborhood bookstore where hardly anyone came anymore. Every morning she unlocked the old wooden door, dusted the shelves, made fresh coffee, and greeted every customer with the same gentle smile. Business was slow. Money was tight. But Clara loved books because stories never judged people by their appearance. People, however, often did. Whenever she walked through crowded streets, strangers whispered comments. Some laughed, some stared, some believed she couldn't hear them. She always heard. After years of cruel jokes, Clara stopped wearing colorful clothes. She chose oversized sweaters, loose coats, simple jeans, not because she disliked herself, because she wanted the world to notice her less. One rainy afternoon, a black luxury car stopped outside the bookstore. The driver rushed inside. "Excuse me," he said politely. "We're looking for a first edition of The Count of Monte Cristo." Clara smiled. "I think we have one." She climbed a ladder, searched the highest shelf, and carefully removed an old leather-bound book. As she climbed down, her foot slipped. The ladder shook before she could fall. A strong hand caught her. She looked up. Dark eyes met hers. Calm. Confident. Dangerous. The man holding her was Lorenzo Moretti. "Careful," he said quietly. Clara quickly stepped back. "Thank you." She had no idea who he was. To her, he was simply another customer. She wrapped the book carefully and smiled. "Your total is $400. Lorenzo looked around the tiny bookstore. "You've read this 3 times. Worth reading again." She laughed softly. Some books become better every time. Lorenzo bought the book, but before leaving, he looked back once, not because of her appearance, because of her smile. It was honest, and honest smiles were rare in his world. Over the following weeks, Lorenzo returned several times. Always alone. Sometimes he bought books. Sometimes he simply asked for recommendations. Little by little, they talked. About history. About cooking. About old movies. About dreams. Never about money. Never about power. Clara still didn't know she was talking to one of the most feared men in America. She only knew he listened carefully whenever she spoke. One evening, Lorenzo asked, "Why don't you ever talk about yourself?" Clara smiled sadly. "Books are more interesting." "I disagree." She looked surprised. "I think you're hiding." Those words stayed in her mind long after he left. Meanwhile, Lorenzo's closest advisor, Marco Rossi, became suspicious. "You visited that bookstore 6 times this month. So? You've never visited any place 6 times. Lorenzo closed the file he was reading. "She's different." Marco raised an eyebrow. "Because she's beautiful." Lorenzo answered calmly. "No. Because she treats me like a normal man." Marco laughed. "Boss. Do you even know what she looks like?" Lorenzo frowned. "What do you mean?" Marco placed several photographs on the desk. They showed Clara walking home, wearing loose clothes, looking tired after work. Marco hesitated. "The other families are already talking." Lorenzo remained silent. "They're saying ... double quotes." Marco stopped. "Finish." there, saying she's too big for you. For several seconds, the room became completely silent. Then Lorenzo smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile that appeared just before someone made a very expensive mistake. A month later, Lorenzo invited Clara to a charity gala. She almost refused. I don't belong at events like that. You belong wherever you're respected. What if they laugh? Lorenzo looked directly into her eyes. Then, they'll learn an expensive lesson. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she agreed. Now, standing in the center of the ballroom. Clara finally understood. Every whisper. Every smile. Every mocking glance. They weren't hiding their opinions. A famous fashion influencer deliberately walked past her and whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Honey. Double quotes. No designer can fix that figure. Several people laughed. Clara looked down, but old memories came rushing back. School hallways, cruel classmates, broken confidence. She took one slow breath. Maybe coming here had been a mistake. Just as she quietly reached for her purse. Lorenzo gently placed his hand over hers. His voice was calm. Don't leave. They haven't finished embarrassing themselves. Clara looked confused. Across the ballroom, the mocking guests laughed again. None of them noticed that Lorenzo's security chief had already received a single text message from the boss. Only 3 words: start the investigation, because Lorenzo had discovered something long ago. The people who mocked others the loudest usually had the darkest secrets, and before sunrise every person who laughed at Clara Bennett would wish they had remained silent. The ballroom remained filled with soft music and fake smiles. Most guests believed the moment had already passed. They thought Clara would quietly leave the party, embarrassed by the whispers. They did not know Lorenzo Moretti. He never forgot an insult, especially one aimed at someone who had done nothing wrong. Lorenzo gently turned toward Clara. Would you like to dance? She looked surprised. Here, he smiled. Yes. I've never been good at dancing. You don't need perfect steps. You only need to trust me. Clara slowly placed her hand in his. As they walked to the center of the ballroom, I followed them. The music changed into a slow piano melody. Lorenzo placed one hand gently on her back. The other held her hand. There was no shame in his eyes, no hesitation, only respect. Little by little, Clara relaxed. For the first time that night, she smiled. The guests who had laughed only minutes earlier now stood in complete silence. They expected Lorenzo to hide her. Instead, he proudly stood beside her where everyone could see. Across the room, businessman Richard Kane laughed quietly with 2 other wealthy guests. I give it 1 month. The boss will get bored. The 3 men laughed. None of them noticed Marco Rossi walking toward Lorenzo. He leaned close and whispered, the investigation is finished. So quickly, Marco nodded. You were right. Lorenzo's eyes became cold. What did you find? Richard Kane has been laundering money through fake charities. The influencer who mocked Clara owes millions in unpaid taxes, and Senator Brooks accepted illegal payments from Kane's company. Lorenzo simply nodded. Release everything. Marco smiled. Tonight. Lorenzo looked across the ballroom. They wanted entertainment. I'll give them entertainment. Only 20 minutes later, phones across the ballroom began ringing. One businessman suddenly turned pale. Another rushed toward the exit. A famous influencer stared at her phone in complete disbelief. News alerts appeared one after another. Federal investigation begins into Kane Industries. Leaked financial records reveal massive fraud. Politician linked to criminal money scheme. Guests whispered nervously. What is happening? Who leaked this? How is this possible? Richard Kane's confident smile disappeared. He looked toward Lorenzo. The mafia boss calmly sipped his coffee. Without saying a single word. Richard finally understood. This wasn't coincidence. This was punishment. The influencer who had insulted Clara hurried over. I think there has been a misunderstanding. Clara looked at her quietly. The woman forced a smile. I didn't mean what I said. Before Clara could answer, Lorenzo spoke. No, you meant every word. The woman lowered her eyes. Lorenzo continued. The difference is, now your words have consequences. Security politely escorted her out of the ballroom. Nobody laughed anymore. When the event finally ended, Clara and Lorenzo stepped outside. The cool night air felt peaceful. Clara looked at him. You did all this because they laughed at me? Lorenzo shook his head. No. I did it because they believed they could hurt someone without consequences. She stayed silent. They weren't punished for insulting your appearance. They were punished because cruel people always believe they're untouchable. Over the following weeks, the story spread across the city. People talked about Lorenzo's speech. They talked about Clara. But something unexpected also happened. Hundreds of women started visiting Clara's bookstore. Some were young, some were older. Some were plus-size. Others were not. Many simply wanted to meet the woman who had stood proudly beside the most feared mafia boss in the city. One afternoon, a teenage girl entered the bookstore. She looked nervous. "Miss Bennett," Clara smiled. "Yes." The girl held an old photograph. "I almost didn't come." "Why?" "Because people laugh at me too." Clara gently invited her to sit down. The girl looked at the floor. "They say I'll never be beautiful." Clara smiled softly. "For many years, people told me the same thing. What changed?" Clara looked toward the bookstore window. Outside, Lorenzo was waiting beside his car. He wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't impatient. He simply waited. The same way he always did. Clara looked back at the girl. "I finally met someone who looked at my heart before my body." The girl smiled. Tiny tears filled her eyes. Months passed. The bookstore became successful again. Lorenzo quietly bought the building without telling Clara. Instead of raising the rent, he transferred ownership to her. When she discovered the papers, she rushed to his office. "You bought my bookstore." Lorenzo smiled. "No, I protected your future. You can't keep solving every problem." He laughed softly. "I know, but this wasn't about solving a problem. It was about making sure no one could ever take your dream away." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You always do things without asking." "I know. And honestly, I'm hoping you'll forgive me." She laughed through her tears. "I probably will." One evening, they walked through a quiet city park. The trees moved gently in the wind. Children laughed nearby. It felt like an ordinary evening, something Lorenzo had rarely experienced. He suddenly stopped walking. "Clara." She turned. "I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who admired my money, my power, my name." He took one slow breath. "You were the first person who simply asked me what book I wanted to read." She smiled. "I thought you were just another customer." "I'm glad you did." He reached into his coat pocket. Not for an expensive diamond. Not for a grand surprise. Only for a small silver bookmark. It was shaped like an open book. "I bought this the day we first met. I wanted to give it to you, but I was waiting for the right moment." Clara accepted it carefully. "It's beautiful." Lorenzo smiled. "So are you?" She looked down shyly. "You know, I still have days when I don't feel confident." Lorenzo gently took her hand. "So do I." She looked surprised. "You?" He nodded. "Everyone carries scars. Some are simply harder to see." 1 year later, the same charity gala returned. The same ballroom. The same guests. This time, when Lorenzo and Clara entered together, nobody whispered. Nobody laughed. Nobody dared make cruel comments. Instead, people stood. They applauded. Not because they feared Lorenzo, but because they respected the woman walking beside him. She had never changed herself to fit someone else's idea of beauty. She had simply stopped believing the lies others told her. As the applause echoed through the ballroom, Clara looked at Lorenzo. "Do you hear that?" He smiled. "What, they're finally quiet?" Lorenzo laughed. "No, they're finally listening." Sometimes the strongest revenge is not destroying those who mocked you. Sometimes it is living so happily that their words lose all power. And sometimes, the most feared mafia boss in the city doesn't fall in love with the woman everyone expects. He falls in love with the one who teaches him that kindness, loyalty, and a beautiful heart will always be worth more than perfect looks. Because true love never asks someone to become smaller. It simply reminds them they were always enough.